Residents of downtown Honolulu, Liliha, and uanu will elect a new state senator. Democrat Karl Rhoads and Libertarian Harry Ozols each want the job. And for the nonpartisan Honolulu City Prosecutor's race, incumbent Kaneshiro is being challenged by attorney Anosh Yaqoob, who says he's not an insider and it's time for change. State Senate District 13, Rhoads versus Ozols. Honolulu Prosecutor, Kaneshiro versus Yaqoob. All four candidates are here waiting to take your questions and comments. This live presentation of Insights on PBS Hawaii starts now.
Aloha, welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Liliha Maddock. After 20 years on the job, veteran lawmaker Suzanne Chun-Oakland decided to step down from her seat representing State Senate District 13, which includes downtown Honolulu, uanu, and Liliha. Democrat Representative Karl Rhoads and retired airline pilot Harry Ozols are both vying for the chance to succeed her. They're both here tonight to talk about their ideas to tackle crime, homelessness, and affordable housing needs in that area. Then the two candidates running for the office of Honolulu City Prosecutor, incumbent Kaneshiro and attorney Anosh Yaqoob, will join us during the second half of the program. We hope you'll participate in tonight's discussion. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org. Don't forget to call in your questions early for the candidates for State Senate District 13, since it will only be featured during the first half of the program. Prior to tonight's show, there was a random drawing that determined the seating order and the order we will use throughout the program. Now to the candidates. Harry Ozols is the Libertarian candidate for Senate District 13 and is a retired airline captain. He currently serves on the uanu Punchbowl Neighborhood Board and has been on numerous homeowners and employees boards as president and vice president. Mr. Ozols was also a longtime union member and small business owner. Representative Karl Rhoads is the Democratic candidate for Senate District 13 and has been in the State House of Representatives for 10 years, serving the district that includes Kalihi, Palama, Iwilei, and Chinatown. While in office, Representative Rhoads promoted legislation that facilitated the state's purchase of Kukui Gardens and legislation that made it mandatory that politicians disclose super PAC sources of funding. There's also a third candidate for this race. Republican candidate Rod Tam was invited to participate on our program, but was unable to attend any of the available dates. Before we dive into the discussion, let's take a look at the demographic makeup for Senate District 13.
This state Senate district, with just over 56,000 residents, covers Liliha, Palama, Iwilei, Kalihi, Nu'uanu, Pacific Heights, Pa'oa, Lower Tantalus, and downtown. The median age is 44 years old. 76% of the residents are Asian, 22.5% Caucasian, and just under 17% say they are Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. There are 12,800 families, and the average household income is $54,654. 13% of all residents and 10% of all families are living below the poverty level. 42% speak a language other than English. The median value of an owner-occupied housing unit is $591,800, and the median monthly rental fee is $968.
So we've just heard a snapshot of this community. Mr. Ozols, let's start with you. What issues made you want to run for this office?
Well, I feel that it's my duty to really try to do what I can. Now that I'm retired, I served in the Air Force for 22 years and retired as an officer. And now I have the time and the effort that I like to pay back to the community and make our lives to keep the standard of living that we have and improve it any way that I can. So specific issues, of course, that concern all of us are the homeless, the crime, which is can be better controlled. And I would like to have my input into making a better life for all of us.
All right, Representative Rhoads, what is making you leave the House to run for this Senate seat?
Well, I think I've done a good job in the House. I've been there 10 years. I represent a challenging district in many respects. Homelessness is a very difficult problem for us. There's about 5,000 homeless people in the state, and we have a very high percentage of those within House District 29. I feel like I can carry that experience over in the Senate and do a good job there as well.
Well, you've both mentioned homelessness, so let's start there. Mr. Ozols, what are some specifics of the plans that you would bring to this office if elected?
Well, it's a multifaceted, complex subject that a lot of people have made stabs at, some very good and effective, some not. Throwing money at the problem is not going to resolve the problem. You've got to treat all of the aspects of it. The mental illness that needs to be addressed, that's a very big problem. You need to, some of these people can't get the medications that they need. They can't go. They don't have the capacity or the ability to go. So mental health care must come to them. Their prescriptions must get there. Also, we need to somehow give people a sense of pride in themselves instead of being down and feeling like they're worthless. For example, Albuquerque, New Mexico has a great program that goes out in the morning and picks up panhandlers and other people that are willing to work, and they take them out and they clean up streets, they do brush cleanups, and they buy them lunch, and after 5 hours they give them $50. And you have a certain amount of pride in yourself when you have earned that instead of sat on a corner with a cardboard sign begging. So you've earned this, and now you've got some change in your pocket. You have a little bit more of a swagger. So that gives you a little bit of sense of pride. So those are some of the kind of things that I would like to explore.
Representative Rhoads, do you think a program like that would be something to consider?
Well, certainly something to consider. I think that if you look at the places, if you look at the cities that have gotten a better handle on homelessness than we have, there is a combination of creative thinking, and I agree on the getting the prescriptions to those who are mentally ill, and Suzanne Chun-Oakland and I have worked on bills to bring that about. But I do think that the cities that have done the best on homelessness are ones that are willing to commit resources to it too. The problem is not going to go away if no government resources are committed to it, and the reasons for that are, each homeless person has their own story, and you have to try to address them where they are. Some are mentally ill, some are on drugs, some are working and just can't afford an affordable place to live.
What about the sense of some in the community that it is sort of an endless problem, and that people might choose to move here who are homeless, and that no amount of programs will ever be able to conquer the rising amount of people who might be homeless in Hawaii?
Well, when I was first elected, I promised myself that I would not shy away from problems just because they were difficult. Yes, it is a difficult problem, and that's why no one snapped their fingers already to make it go away. But is it complete? No. Is it insurmountable? No, of course not. I don't know if we can ever have absolutely no homeless people, but even 6 or 7 years ago, before the recession, there was quite a fewer of them than there are now. And if you look at other cities that have had the same kinds of problems, many of them have made major strides in reducing the number. So it's not an insoluble problem. In fact, many of the steps we know what to do already. We just have to do them.
Let's turn now. I'm sure homelessness will be coming up throughout this half hour, but crime in the district is an issue. Mr. Ozols, any thought on that?
Well, part of the problem with crime is the proliferation of drugs, and people have to commit crimes to pay for their habits. I would like to see a world someday, and I would like to work towards that, where a lot of these victimless crimes were not prosecuted and were not persecuted, and that would lower the cost, of course, of someone that chooses to ingest drugs, which we should all have a right to do, so long as we don't hurt someone else or stop other people from their rights. So if victimless crimes such as that were not, so much attention would be paid to them by the police department, for example, and prosecutors, there would be much more resources towards fighting real crime, which is person-on-person crime, person-on-business crime, violence. And that's what our people that we pay to protect us should be doing and concentrating on.
Do you agree with that point of view?
Well, yes and no. I agree that unfortunately our jail systems have become basically our the method of dealing with people with addictions, and it's a very expensive way to deal with people with addictions. I agree to the extent that we need to funnel more resources. It's cheaper to funnel more resources to working on the addictions rather than treating using illegal drugs as a crime. There are, however, crimes that derive from the addiction that really are crimes. Burglaries where the addicts steal stuff to support their habit, to make money to support their habit. I think where I disagree is sort of the degree at which what we do personally affects those around us. Even things that that some people might consider, for me to take crystal methamphetamine, which I think a libertarian point, and libertarians obviously don't all, there's not like a code that every libertarian has to agree to this 12 things, just like when a Democratic Party there's not 12 things that we all have to agree on. But I do think the libertarians tend to look at, what you do to your own body is your own business. But, and in a sense that's true, but I do think that something like smoking, it affects other people around you, even if the actual consequence, if you're the only one who gets lung cancer, that still has an effect on society because it costs the healthcare system money, it costs the economy money because people who smoke generally are not as healthy overall and they miss more days of work. So there is a difference of opinion, I think, there in terms of just how much what is normally considered private behavior has an effect on the rest of us, whether we want it to or not.
Well, that's the problem with the current thinking, and it has been for a long time, is especially the Democratic Party wants to control things. And Republicans also want to control things. The Libertarian Party wants to decontrol things and allow people their own choices over their bodies and their actions. But the other side of that coin is also they need to be responsible for their actions. So as far as someone taking drugs or smoking and then developing lung cancer, society should not be paying for that. That is a personal responsibility if they have health insurance or whatever. I mean, you don't let someone die on the street, but that's not the point, is you don't go to extraordinary events and pay lots of money out of taxpayer money because of someone else's choices. So responsibility is the other side of personal freedom.
But I think, unless we need to switch topics, I think in practical terms, you have to be very hard-hearted to follow libertarianism to its logical conclusion. Because if you're irresponsible and you do smoke and you get cancer and you don't bother to cover yourself with health insurance, then somebody ends up paying for it. And it's not just the person who has the lung cancer, it's all of society, because you're going to end up in the emergency room. And we're not hard-hearted enough to just say, hey, it's your fault you got lung cancer, you smoked, it's your fault that you didn't get health insurance, and too bad, we're not letting you in. We're not like that, and we shouldn't be like that.
So the effort should go into education, not telling people how to live their lives.
All right, let's move on for the time being to rail. If elected, Mr. Ozols, would you support the extension of the excise tax surcharge to fund rail?
I support first of all, it's not a state decision, it's more of a city and county. But as far as from the state point of view, I would support the extension of the rail. I would not support extension of any taxes. As a matter of fact, out of the 3 candidates that are running for this office, I am the only one that is vocal about lowering taxes. I'm the only one that does not have any allegations or convictions of any wrongful mishandling of funds. I'm the only one that does not have career assumptions and wants to campaign while I hold an office. I'm retired. I don't need to build a career. My only reason for running for this office, I feel a duty and obligation to give back to my community and give my neighbors a voice as to what it is that they really and truly need to make their lives better.
Well, I beg to differ. I have not been accused of. I haven't even been accused of anything. Now, our third opponent, who's not here, has pled guilty to a number of theft counts from his previous employer, which was the City and County of Honolulu. I haven't. On the contrary, I have been ethically very careful. I've been chair of the Judiciary Committee, and I've tried to make government more transparent, and I've been exemplary in my own ethical behavior, so I don't appreciate that comment.
I beg to differ with you.
Well, then what are you talking about? You need to be more specific.
Some 15 years ago, and this is widely reported, that you and your wife had paid some kickbacks to a city councilman, which is illegal by itself. But the only reason that you and your wife were not prosecuted was because you gained an immunity from the prosecutor for the testimony.
Well, you have your facts are just wrong. I'm proud of what my wife did. She told the truth in a situation that was very difficult. For those of you who don't remember the story, it was quite a while ago now. She worked for former Councilmember Andy Mirikitani, and she testified at his federal trial, where he was convicted of extortion and witness tampering. One of the witnesses he tampered was my wife, and one of the people he extorted was my wife. Whenever he changed his status, changed in the federal, and he went to jail for 4 years. I mean, my wife helped put a corrupt politician behind bars. Whenever there was a change in his status, as he changed prisons or he was released, she would get a letter from the Department of Justice saying, this started out as a victim of a federal crime, you have the right to know that X, he's being moved from this prison to another. So I just utterly reject that. My wife did the right thing. I'm very proud of what she did, and you know, if we had to do it again, we'd do it exactly the same way.
But the fact is, you did pay a kickback.
No, that's not what happened. She testified truthfully. He was convicted of extortion.
All right. Would you like any other chance to address what he's talking about?
That's what happened.
All right, then let's move. I didn't get your response in terms of the excise tax surcharge.
Oh, back to rail, the original question. Well, we did extend I voted for, and we did extend the excise tax a couple years ago. And I mean, I've always been a rail supporter. I think that as Honolulu becomes more and more urban, we do need alternate forms of transportation. I do think that primarily rail is for the West Side guys who are having these just horrible commutes. But going forward, I don't know, because you know, this is the biggest public capital improvement project in the history of the state, and to this point, no money has been borrowed, not a dime. Normally, that's the only thing the government is allowed to borrow money for, is capital improvement projects. So I don't think that it would be unreasonable for the city at this point to borrow whatever the difference is at this point, 1.5 billion, something like that, for a multi-billion-dollar project. We'll see. I mean, I'm not ruling it out. It may make sense. It may make sense to lower the tax and extend it longer, or extend it for a certain number of more years. But I do think it makes sense in the long run to send it all the way to UH, which is not part of the current plan. So, you know, that will require further funding. But there's different ways you could structure it. But I would point out that no money has been borrowed at this point, and that's unusual for a project of this size.
And that might be a way you would like to see them consider going with this?
Well, it would still be a relatively small percentage of the overall project. It's very unusual to pay as you go on something this big.
I would like to see more private enterprise involvement. I mean, can you picture a station in downtown or somewhere built with the help and cooperation of McDonald's? You know, the people that benefit the most from the traffic, from the business, they should be the ones that are doing most of the funding instead of taking it out of the taxpayer's pocket. So if you had a McDonald's, for example, helping to build this station, it would be so convenient for the riders, and the city would get funding from this business because they would benefit from it. So it's a free market helping each other.
All right, Representative, let's move on to the aging population, that issue in your district. What are some of your ideas for addressing those needs?
Well, I actually just got an award from AARP last week having to do with passage of what's so-called CARE Act, which requires that when you're released from the hospital that you be given instructions that you can designate someone who's your caregiver, and that you be given instructions about what needs to be done after they leave. Obviously, most people would prefer to to deal with whatever problems they have to deal with at home. And I think we should set things up so that is done as much as possible. It's a very difficult issue because long-term care is extremely expensive, and the market has not provided affordable long-term care insurance for anybody, basically. The percentage of people who can afford long-term care is very low. And there was a bill before my time in the legislature that actually passed and was vetoed by then Governor Lingle that would have been a partial solution where both the employer and the employee contributed for over a period of years, and you got a benefit at the end. I'm open to open to clever ideas on how to reduce the funding burden for long-term care, but that's a very difficult issue, and there are very big dollar amounts involved, no matter who pays for it, whether it's the private sector or whether it's some kind of a government program.
All right, Mr. Ozols, your thought.
You know, there has to be some taxes collected to provide some services. I think we provide too many services, but that's another subject. However, it does not need to keep coming from the same well. You know, we have a $1 billion surplus that has just been announced. That just indicates that we are overtaxed. So where do we get some of this other funding? Well, what do we have to sell here in Hawaii? We have this beautiful climate, this beautiful atmosphere, aloha spirit and everything that makes people just flock to us from the east and from the west. Why don't those people that get the benefit of sitting on our beaches or riding our public transit or visiting our historic sites, they should take a higher burden to take the burden off of the citizens that live here, that provide this for them. So that's where I would get more funding.
By taxing tourists?
By, yeah, maybe you can call it a cover charge to get in, you know.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, first, having the regard to the tax question, yeah, we do have a $1 billion surplus this year, but if you look at the obligations that the government has, at this point, our taxes are not covering the obligations that we have. We have $6 billion in the employee retirement system that we're legally obligated to pay. There's another $8 billion in the employee union trust fund for health care for retirees, both for government workers, both retired and not retired. And those are not, you know, that's $14 billion right there. So I'm hopeful that a big chunk of that $1 billion goes into one or both of those, but I think it's incorrect to say that we're getting less than what we're paying for. I think on the contrary, it's the other way around. We've gotten more than what we've paid for.
All right, let's go to some questions. We are running out of time for this segment of the show. On homelessness, is either candidate in favor of identifying homeless relatives on the mainland and sending them back to their families? Mr. Ozols.
I think that should be one of the options. I don't think people should be, again, forced to do anything they don't want to do. However, if there should be, that could be one option that would be offered, yes.
Representative?
It's already offered. We actually passed a bill that had a provision like that I don't believe has been implemented, but the private sector is doing it as well. There are concerns about it because people they try to vet them pretty carefully because they worry that people are just going to use it as a free ride back to wherever and then just come back. So, but ones who are, to the extent they can determine who genuinely is trapped, caught here because they can't afford the airfare back to the mainland, there are organizations that will help them.
All right, and this question on affordable housing. How would each candidate tackle the issue of affordable housing? Is it lacking in the district, and how can developers provide more? Mr. Ozols.
Well, sometimes the government is its own worst enemy. For example, we have zoning laws, and to build new housing, you have to provide a parking space. Well, low affordable housing, a lot of people don't have cars, yet they have to have a parking space built for them and that they have to pay for. They take public transit to work. So that would make, for example, just one example of a zoning law that restricts what affordable housing can occur. So I would look at deregulating items. Again, I'm the only candidate that's talking about lowering taxes and taking away regulations. We have too many as we have.
All right, Representative.
So I'm sorry, the question again was?
In terms of affordable housing, what would you like to see done in terms of improving the situation in this area?
Well, I've been doing it for 10 years. I mean, as you mentioned in the opening, Kukui Gardens was saved as affordable housing because of my bill, one of my bills. Senior Residence at Evil A is another project that was a public-private partnership with the government, where the state kicked in, I think it was $20 million altogether to get it built. The redevelopment of Mayor-Ride homes is another one where I'm optimistic that we'll get more affordable housing, but it's those kind of projects, and it will be a combination of private and government money to move it forward. But the problem is the market doesn't provide affordable housing on its own. You can make money on affordable housing, you just can't make as much money as you can on luxury condos. And there's this new condotel that's being proposed for Kapiolani. Well, why isn't the developer proposing a low-income housing building instead? Well, the answer is simple. It's money. That's the capitalist system. You're trying to make money. And the zoning, there's actually already lots of zoning exceptions for affordable housing, and it still hasn't encouraged private companies to build as much as we need.
And do you think a loosening of things like parking spot requirements would help?
Well, that one I actually agree with him, because the second most expensive thing that most families are is their transportation costs. And my wife and I do not own a car, and we figured that we save $8,000 a year by not doing so, even after you factor in buying bus passes, renting a car once in a while, whatever. For a poorer family, yes, they should be figuring out ways not to have to. I mean, many of them are already taking the bus, they don't have cars, but if you can get rid of a car, you can afford more housing.
All right, and we're going to have to leave it there. Nice to leave on a point of agreement. Thank you both for taking the time to come tonight and help viewers make their choice.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you,
Thank
gentlemen. And before we meet the candidates for Honolulu City Prosecutor, we have a very special Hiki No report from students at Sacred Heart Academy. Their report on the 2016 IUCN World Conservation Congress being held in Hawaii focuses on workshops and presentations promoting the next generation of conservation stewards, their generation. Featured in the story is U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell.
My parents always taught me the ololo no eao, he ali ka aina, he kawa ke kanaka. The land is a chief, man is its servant, so I've always seen my role as being here to take care of the earth and help it however I can.
In Hawaii, the notion of taking care of its natural resources from land to sea, or Mauka to Makai, is rooted deeply within its people. And just as it is on a global scale, this belief grows from the seedlings of knowledge planted in the minds of today's youth, something echoed at the 2016 IUCN World Conservation Congress.
We believe in the power of youth, that not only they have the physical capacity to transform and restore areas, but also just the heart and the brilliance to really create amazing ideas that it can change our world.
We're going to be removing invasive species, and once we clear the area a little bit, we're going to be planting a few native species.
I've always felt that it was my kuleana as a Hawaiian to take care of the land. I hope that my generation of upcoming adults will really start to see that we have a duty, and it's an awesome duty, to take care of the world.
And everything. The Clean Air Act. U.S. Secretary of the Interior Sally Jewell worked alongside the youth participants during the stream restoration workshop for the IUCN Congress. She oversees national parks and other public lands, but her focus remains on future generations and encouraging them to become stewards of the land.
Part of my commitment to engaging youth in nature is to make sure that there is a place for nature in the lives of young people, and then give them an opportunity to learn in the best classroom there is, which is the one with no walls.
From removing invasive species and replanting native vegetation in lush Makiki Valley, the global community gathers here at the Hawaii Convention Center to learn that their tools of conservation are not limited to shovels or gloves.
And if you want to grab people's attention, the best way to do that is to tell a story. So as far as like a good form of communication to like make that happen, digital storytelling. Or the format that Hiki No uses, which is along with just showing people what's going on, explain it, talk about what's going on, talk about the significance that it has with the community.
Subi Ono, an aspiring journalist, was part of the Listen to Young Voices panel that demonstrated how conservation can be conveyed in many forms, including music, film, and written and spoken word.
Your activist kayaks and canoes.
His video on sustainable opelu fishing told a story that inspired not only viewers, but also himself.
The way I hope for our generation to make an impact is to practice conservation fishing. Just take enough for you and your family to eat. Take enough for you to eat.
The workshop left many excited about conservation, including a group of junior rangers from Australia who give back to their homeland in various ways.
I'm involved in a turtle hospital, so we have tanks and with sick turtles that we find on the beach, or if there are other people in the community report them to us, we pick them up and we take care of them till they get better, then we release them again.
Ultimately, the call to become a next generation steward resonates throughout the world and gives many a purpose, but mostly hope.
My hope is that the experiences of the young people with the experiences of people that have been around a little bit longer and have been doing this work will be inspirational to both sides, and that young people will feel an opportunity to commit to making our planet better.
As the next generation of leaders, it is important that youth continue to make the world a healthier, better place, not only for themselves, but also for those who will come centuries later. This is Kailaniana Avlog from Sacred Hearts Academy for Hikino.
Welcome back, and we want to thank the Hikino students from Sacred Hearts Academy for their report. We're now joined by the two candidates in the nonpartisan race for Honolulu City Prosecutor. Keith Kaneshiro is running for re-election to the office of Honolulu City Prosecutor, a post he's held since 2010. He also served 2 terms as Honolulu Prosecutor from 1988 to 2006. Prior to becoming prosecutor, Mr. Kaneshiro served more than 30 years as Deputy Prosecutor, Deputy Attorney General, Honolulu Prosecuting Attorney, and the State Director of Public Safety. Anosh Yaqoob has been an attorney in private practice since 2009, representing clients in the district circuit and appellate courts. In law school, Mr. Yaqoob clerked for the Maui County Prosecutor's Office. If elected, Mr. Yaqoob said he'd like to restore integrity to the office of Honolulu Prosecutor and provide a fresh perspective and voice. Before we hear from the candidates, let's take a look at the mission and function of the Department of the Honolulu City Prosecuting Attorney.
The Department of the Prosecuting Attorney's mission is to investigate and prosecute violations of all statutes, ordinances, and regulations for which there are criminal sanctions occurring within the City and County of Honolulu. The department employs 100 deputy prosecutors and 170 support staff. During the period of fiscal years 2009 through 2013, the operating budget expenditures averaged $18 million annually. During that same 5-year period, annually the average number of cases accepted was 7,258. Average resolutions, 2,050, for an average resolution rate of 28%. Average number of convictions, 80. Average non-convictions, 180. The department has 10 divisions. 9 cover the various functions and areas of focus for the City and County of Honolulu. However, the Appellate Division represents the state of Hawaii in all matters filed in the State Appellate Court and provides research and reference assistance.
And Mr. Kaneshiro, let's start with you. Why are you running again?
Well, I'm running again because I want to continue the work that I've been doing for the past 6 years. And there's a lot of things we need to accomplish. We are doing a lot on domestic violence, animal cruelty, which is a priority in our office. We're also working on elder abuse, and we're going to be opening up our Honolulu Family Justice Center, which is to provide a secure transitional housing for victims of domestic violence, sex assault, or human trafficking. These are some of the projects I want to continue.
Mr. Yaqoob, why are you running?
I'm running for a number of reasons, Ms. Maddock. I believe that voters who want a choice should get to have one. I think it's unfortunate that for so many of our elected offices, for so many of our elected officials, they get to just slide into office unopposed year after year, term after term, without anybody ever standing for election against them. I don't think that Keith Kaneshiro should get another term. I don't think that Kaneshiro should get an unlimited lifetime supply of taxpayer money to run a personal fiefdom in the manner that has occurred for a long time. I don't believe that any elected official is entitled to their office. I don't think that they should just get to slide in unopposed every single term, term after term, year after year. I'm also running for the citizens and voters who want to vote for someone else, because there isn't anybody else in the race. Nobody else even wanted to try. Nobody else even wanted to try to take this on. Because I think that voters deserve the chance to have someone else to vote for. If they just didn't want to vote for the same cast of characters, the same catalog of characters over and over and over and over again, they wanted somebody different. There are a number of substantive legal and political reasons why I'm running as well. I believe the sit-lie ban is unconstitutional. Now, I understand that the Honolulu City Prosecutor, and I understand that law enforcement is about enforcing the laws. And I understand that 99.9999999% of the time, that's exactly right, and that's what I will do as well if elected, if the voters will give me the vote of confidence. But I do believe sometimes there is a 0.00001% where the right thing to do, and justice calls for, not prosecuting. I would like for maybe voters and viewers to imagine a scenario of where perhaps we're talking about a Jim Crow law. If a prosecutor decided, I think this is an unconstitutional law, and I have a good faith belief as an officer of the court, I have a good faith, sincerely held belief as an officer of the court that this is unconstitutional, that they will not prosecute under that law. If the state legislature or the city council passed a law tomorrow that said all folks of Filipino or Korean or Samoan descent can't drive over 50 miles an hour, and somebody got a ticket for that, I would be somebody who would say, I'm just going to go ahead and decline prosecution on this, because I think it's an unconstitutional law, because it would be obviously unconstitutional to me. So I think the sit-lie ban is unconstitutional. I'd like to say that up front, to be perfectly clear about it, to let voters who have the same point of view, if there are voters and viewers right now who are wondering, is there any candidate in any race who thinks that the sit-lie ban is unconstitutional? I am one of those people. And if they share that point of view, they have a candidate in the race to vote for. There are a number of other issues as well. Recently, the state legislature passed House Bill 1902, the sex trafficking ban. And I looked at that bill, and I looked at the testimony that was there for the sex trafficking ban, and I realized that the Honolulu City prosecutors had issued testimony against it. And I read that testimony, and it had something to do with certain provisions and subsection here and a subsection there. But if it had been me in the job, I would just like to make clear to voters and viewers, Ms. Maddock, yourself also, the testimony would have been different. It would have just been opposite of what was submitted. Because I'm a different person, I come from a different worldview, I come from a different background, I come from a different work experience. It just would have been different. There are many other issues, on any number of issues. Let's look recently at the gambling indictment case. Recently, there was a case that was brought that was supposed to be the biggest gambling case in the history of the state of Hawaii, and then the indictment was dismissed. But if you look at Kaneshiro's comments in the news that was reported, as I read it, he said that it was the judge's fault, that the judge got it wrong, that the judge should not have dismissed that case. My point of view would have been opposite. You would have received different comments in the news from me. If the voters had given me the vote of confidence, or if they would, and if it had been me in the job, I wouldn't have said that. There would have been a whole different way of approaching that.
All right. Mr. Kaneshiro, let's start with sort of accusations of the perception of the office being insiderish. You used the expression personal fiefdom.
I did, yes.
Do you think that there is truth to that there could be more openness?
Well, I don't know what's meant by insider. If insider means that it allowed me to obtain $1.2 million from the legislature in state funding for the office, or if being an insider meant that it allowed me to obtain full funding from the city council for the office, or if it being an insider meant that it allowed me to obtain $800,000 and $200,000 in federal grants from the federal government, then I think that being an insider made the office more effective, because I have the connections, I'm working collaboratively with the legislature, the city council, the federal government, to obtain things for the office so the office can have adequate funding. We also, because of my people have trust, and they can work with me. We have joint investigations with the federal government, joint state and city, federal government investigations, because we can work together. Being an insider means collaborative. Yeah, the office, I am an insider, and it allows us to work with other agencies. It allows us to get things for the prosecutor's office to make it more effective.
Mr. Yaqoob?
Yes, 2 points on this. The funding is great, of course, in order to obtain funding, because that's how the deputy prosecutors and the other support staff salaries are paid and other operations are conducted. Of course, that's perfectly fine. If the voters will give me the vote of confidence, I will obtain funding as well. And I believe that the City Council and the state legislature are not looking to defund the prosecutor's office. They'll fund it because they want the lawyers there to earn a living, and they want the lawyers there to prosecute the cases, and that's perfectly fine. And they want the support staff to help them, and that's perfectly great as well. That's not what I mean by insiderish. Recently, the police chief is embroiled in a scandal, and every single time I've heard Hawaii News Now, any of the news outlets, Star Advertiser, any of the newspaper reports, any of these entities that have reported on this matter have always taken care to make sure to say that the police chief's wife works at the prosecutors and that she's a deputy prosecuting attorney. I think that they add that fact, and many times they may not explain fully, but I think that the reason they add that fact is because that might be a little too cozy in the minds of some of the readers, some of the viewers, some of the voters. Some of our citizens might view that as insiderish, that the police chief and that Keith Kaneshiro are too close, that they have too close of a personal relationship, and that his wife actually works in that office. So what this might mean, excuse me, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me give Mr. Kaneshiro a chance to respond to that. Is that too close?
No, I don't think it's too close. Catherine Killoy's position in the office is a deputy prosecutor. She's a very experienced prosecutor. She's a supervisor for the career criminal unit. She's not there because she's a chief's wife. She's there because she is a good attorney. She was there before I got there. So other people hired her and recognized her ability. And it has nothing to do with being insiderish or giving favors for anyone. And you know, the chief, the police chief, I think it's good that the police chief and a prosecuting attorney have a good relationship. Just because we have a good professional relationship doesn't mean that it's going to cloud our judgment on decision. Because I have prosecuted police officers who have committed crime. We've prosecuted them. We have worked together with the police department on investigations. And law enforcement has to work together. You cannot be working on separate. You know, you cannot have some outsider come in and all of a sudden say, oh, this is our insider, or saying things that sounds politically correct. You have to look at the evidence. You have to look at the facts. What evidence do they have? Before you start indicting, before you start condemning someone, make sure you have evidence. That's the job of the prosecutor. Before you charge someone with a crime, you have to make sure there's evidence to charge someone with a crime. Not the fact that you believe someone committed a crime or the fact that newspapers or media said someone committed a crime. It's because there's evidence. Until there is evidence, that's when you charge someone with a crime. And that's the job of the prosecutor.
All right, I'm seeing that, Mr. Yaqoob, you would like a chance to respond.
This is not about specific evidence or specific items that we can point to. This is about appearance of impropriety. This is about the fact that there might be in the minds of voters and citizens who are observing all of this, they might think to themselves, wow, the police chief is under investigation from the federal government, from federal law enforcement under the FBI, but his wife happens to work in the prosecutor's office. Maybe the prosecutors would have seen something that the federal government might have seen, but just won't act upon. And none of us are ever going to know about that, but that's what this is about. It's appearance of impropriety. That's kind of the point that I was making. And the other part about this is, yes, you've been working for 30, 35, 40 years. That's great. I mean, how many different government positions has Kaneshiro had? A litany of them. I don't have any of that. I am an outsider. My challenge represents an outsider's challenge and represents to voters the chance to have someone who hasn't already been there, someone who hasn't already spent their entire life utilizing taxpayer dollars running a personal fiefdom for themselves.
Okay, let's go to some viewers' questions. This is from Lee in Honolulu. For Prosecutor Kaneshiro, what happened in the gambling machine case? What is the law, and has it been retried, and will it be retried?
Well, there were 9 people indicted, and 3 of them, their cases were dismissed for lack of speedy trial. There's a rule called Rule 48 in which you have to take a person to trial within 6 months after they're indicted with a crime. In that particular case, the 3 people, the judge found that it wasn't done within that period of time. So the case was dismissed. There's still 6 other cases, 6 other defendants, and the cases are pending trial. Now, I think what's important is, what is the purpose of prosecution? Prosecution is to stop criminal activity. And the second thing is, the second goal of prosecution is to prevent criminal activity from reoccurring, from happening again. What we did in the gambling case, if you recall what the gambling case was, there was a whole bunch of gambling places proliferating, spreading through all the communities, gambling machines, and nothing was being done until I came into office and we looked at it. And we decided, something has to be done. So we decided to do the gambling case. We raided the gambling places. We seized the machines. We got rulings that the machines were gambling devices, so they can't be used. They're gambling devices. Now, what happened was all the different shops closed down. The different gambling houses closed down. So we stopped criminal activity. The second goal is how you could prevent them from happening again. Well, it's not happening again. Then they're not going to go back and open up more gambling places. And when you saw all these gambling places occurring in different communities, you also saw criminal activities occurring in these communities associated with these gambling houses. As a result of what we did in closing down these gambling places, crime decreased in those areas.
Mr. Yaqoob, would you like a chance to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Maddock. For many of my stances in opposition to Kaneshiro, this isn't about the technicalities and the specifics of what may or may not have happened in that case. I'm just reading this from the newspaper, and I see the comments here from Honolulu City Prosecutor Keith Kaneshiro, or the judge got it wrong. This was the judge's fault. The judge shouldn't have ruled this way. I'm just telling voters and viewers, look at any number of comments on any number of issues, on any number of topics, in any number of stories. You're going to find that I would bring something opposite and something different. My worldview, my political view, my life experience, my work experience, everything has been very different than Kaneshiro's. I wouldn't have said that. If for no other reason than the most crass, craven reason I can think of is I would have never said that, because I know the office has many cases in front of that same judge, and I just wouldn't want that judge to have a negative opinion of the office and the deputies or myself, and the fact that somebody like myself would be putting that out there saying, oh no, the judge got it wrong. He shouldn't have ruled that way.
So you can't have a prosecutor attorney who's afraid of judges, who's afraid to tell when a judge makes a mistake, who's afraid to appeal the judge's decision. That's what we've done. We've appealed the judge's decision. A prosecutor who's afraid of judges, how the judge is going to think, is not an effective prosecutor. You have to have someone who's going to stand for what is right, regardless of what the judge said. If the judge said something is right, then you follow the ruling. But if you feel the judge is wrong, then you have to fight the judge, and you have to appeal that decision. Right. And there's a process. Now, Mr. Yaqoob act like he said this law is unconstitutional. He's not on the Supreme Court. The Hawaii Supreme Court.
You're referring to sit
and lie. He can't make the decision as a prosecuting attorney whether a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. And he's saying that he's going to make that decision. It's for the Supreme Court to make the decision.
All right. You'd like to respond?
2 points, Ms. Maddock. First, I might personally completely agree with Kaneshiro's point of view in terms of the judge got it wrong, but that's not what I would say in public to the press to have that out there. I'm not a prosecutor who would be afraid of judges or afraid of what judges would say. That just wouldn't have been my comment to the press. That might have been what I felt like. That might actually be the case. I just wouldn't have said that. That wouldn't have been the quote you would have seen from me. Finally, concerning the sit-lie ban, of course I know I'm not a Supreme Court justice. Obviously, I understand that. What I'm expressing to voters, viewers, citizens out there who might want a different city prosecutor is my point of view on that law. I understand that that law hasn't been fully adjudicated yet, and it might be deemed constitutional, it might be deemed unconstitutional. But I'd like to give voters a chance up front to know, before you're electing somebody, where do they stand? And I would urge the media, and I would urge voters themselves to ask their candidates for any number of offices, city council, state legislature, mayor, governor, any office, just play a game of poker, somewhat poker with that candidate and ask them with a straight face, do you think the sit-lie ban is constitutional or unconstitutional? And see what they say. Because I think voters and citizens have the right to know, because I think this is an issue that's not going away. The sit-lie ban began in Waikiki, then it expanded to Chinatown. I'm very certain that they're going to want to expand this to the rest of the island of Oahu, and if not, beyond to the neighbor islands as well. This is only going to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I believe that voters should have the chance to know if their elected officials think this is constitutional or not. It's more about a point of view. I'm not saying that I'm a Supreme Court justice who's adjudicated it already. I know that that's not the case.
So we do have some questions on sit-lie ban in terms of opposition to it. Do you have any concerns about the ban?
Well, my concern is that we shouldn't criminalize homelessness, and we've taken that position. We haven't acted to go and push the police to do all these cases, but there are certain laws that deal with the homeless, like drinking in public, being in a public park after dark or after certain hours after it's closed. These laws, which to me, it sort of targets the homeless people. And what we're doing now, and what I'm doing with the public defender and district court, is we are consolidating these cases, having defendants who have these outstanding cases, trying to bring them all together, work on a plea agreement, and bring this case, resolve all these cases. Because what's happening is they're not coming to court, and it's clogging up the courts. So we need to unclog the courts. And to do that, we have to get rid of all these cases. And how we do that is tell the public defenders, come to us, we sit down, we would get a plea agreement, and their client would agree to it. We would not ask for incarceration. We would not ask for fine. What we will do is ask that the court have community service, and we'll provide organizations who can have community service for these people, because you have to have some consequences.
All right.
But what we do is trying to get rid of all these cases.
We're in our final moments, so I'm going to try to whip through a few more of these questions. From Tracy and Makiki, are either of the candidates willing to meet with the sex workers' rights movement? Very quickly.
Yes, I am willing to meet with them. And I would like to echo and agree with Kaneshiro's statement. I don't think we should criminalize being homeless. That is my stance.
Would you be willing to meet with them?
Sure. In fact, we have met with prostitutes who work in massage parlors, and we've given them immunity. They cooperated with us. As a result of that, we're able to indict people who profit from prostitution. We're not going after prostitutes. We're going after people who profit from prostitution.
All right, Mr. Yaqoob, have you ever tried a criminal case? If so, how many?
Yes, I've had many criminal cases. I've been practicing since I graduated in 2008. I've also had many other additional cases besides cases in the criminal courts where I've acted as private defense counsel. I've had personal injury cases, I've had bankruptcy cases, I've had family law cases, divorce, child custody. Yes, the answer is yes.
All right, Mr. Kaneshiro, well, both of you, what would you do about animal cruelty? What are you doing about animal cruelty?
Animal cruelty is one of the priorities in my office. I recognize that people who are cruel to animals are usually cruel to other people. And the second thing is, animals are victims that can't speak for themselves, and they need to be protected. And we've taken a position that we aggressively prosecute animal cruelty cases. Now, we had one case in which there was a puppy mill, and the judge felt that, it was not an important case, and gave some minor fine to the defendant corporation. Subsequent to that, we've gone to the legislature and got the case law passed in which if 10 or more animals are being mistreated, then it becomes a felony. Because prior to that, they were all misdemeanors.
All right.
So now we made it a felony.
Mr. Yaqoob, do you think enough's being done?
To be honest with you, I'm not inside yet. I don't know what enough is or wouldn't be yet, but my stance is yes, aggressively prosecute and fully prosecute to the extent of the law.
All right. Mr. Kaneshiro, this question is from Honolulu. Will you be retrying the Christopher Dede case?
Yes, we will be. And the reason why is because we will retry the case as long as we can legally try the case. If the Supreme Court come up with a decision that says that we cannot retry the case, then it would end there. But until that decision comes out, if they say we can, we will retry it. And to put it back on people who said that we shouldn't, is that if you're family member was killed by someone, would you expect us to aggressively go out and prosecute, or you just decide to drop the case?
All right. Mr. Yaqoob,
Yes.
How would you address police accountability and greater public disclosure?
Well, I think one of the first things that would be important is just the fact that if the voters will give me the vote of confidence and will elect me, I'm not from their world. Voters can be already secure in knowing this guy's not from their world. He's not from within.
All right, and we're in our final moments. Briefly
Yes.
on the issue of police accountability,
Yes.
what would be something that you would do?
Well, everyone can rest assured that with me, there are no sacred cows to me. So it's not like I'm going to sit there and think to myself, I should not prosecute this person. No one is above the law. If somebody breaks the law, then I would aggressively prosecute them. But additionally, people can have confidence to know he's not from within their world. He's not one of their boys.
And Mr. Kaneshiro, very quickly, would you like to see greater police accountability?
There is police accountability. We oversee a lot of the police conduct. And when police commit a crime, we prosecute. If there's enough evidence to prosecute, we prosecute.
All right, and we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, both of you, for a very spirited conversation.
Thank you for having us.
All right, our election 2016 coverage continues next week when we're joined by the candidates for House District 36, which includes Mililani and Mililani Melka. Incumbent Republican Beth Fukumoto Chang will again face longtime opponent Marilyn Lee, the Democrat who once held that seat for 16 years. And in House District 43, Republican incumbent Andrea Tupola and Democratic challenger Stacey Lynn Eli are both vying to represent the district that includes Kalailoa, Ko'olina, and Maili. That's on next week's Insights on PBS Hawaii. Thank you for watching tonight. I'm Malia Maddock. Ahui ho.